I wanted people to be less stupid and less incompetent in dealing with power, so their lives would be easier, so they wouldn't have the pain that I had. I just wanted to reveal it so everybody knows about it, so everybody can share in it. Power is this word or book of knowledge that basically was limited to white males for so many centuries, millennia. Only certain people knew these laws. If you say, I'm not interested in power, that is a maneuver in the power game. You are implicated in it. You are trying to pretend that you're moral, that you're above it all. That is a power move. Powerlessness, feeling that we have no control over the world, is very built into our nervous system. And we cannot stand the feeling of being powerless, of feeling helpless. It's a very primal emotion. And so we're all scrambling for some degree of control over the world. So the idea that I cannot influence at all my children, I cannot influence my spouse, I have no influence or persuasive powers over my boss, over my colleagues, is deeply, deeply painful. We can't stand it. When I wanted to reveal what goes on behind closed doors, I just wanted to reveal the truth of it and level the playing field.
It's Mayim Bialik's breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you, because you know she knows a thing or two. And now she's gonna break down. It's a breakdown. She's gonna break it down.
Hi, I'm Mayim Bialik.
I'm Jonathan Cohen.
And welcome to our breakdown. This is the place where we break things down so you don't have to.
This is the place where we gain power.
This is the place where we find out how power can work to our advantage in work, in dating,
In life.
in life. This is the place where we learn how to seduce anyone and what things you are doing that you don't realize are anti-seduction techniques. Here's a little hint. I've done them all.
Today's guest is really an unbelievable author. His books have changed culture.
Robert Greene has written The 48 Laws of Power, which is a book that attracted the attention of Jay-Z, of Drake. He ended up writing a book with 50 Cent. He is a very unlikely author of this kind of book. He essentially was tired of being mistreated by people in power. And at 38, after having upwards of 50 different jobs that didn't suit him, decided to study the history of what is governing power. And he wrote this book, which is now banned in prisons because it is very, very powerful, for lack of a better word. He's also written a book on seduction, on mastery. He's a really, really interesting person who, by his own admission, is an unlikely person to be mingling with all of these mega superstars.
25 years in, this book that Mayim is holding is selling more than when it was published. He's taken information that used to be siloed, that only a certain elite group of people had, and he has disseminated to the masses. Anyone can follow and learn how to increase their influence over their life.
Also, how to understand the forces of power that are often working against us. And we end up talking about everything from polyamory to hating your job and finding your passion.
Spirituality, near-death experiences, how anxiety can actually be a teacher to help you find the thing that you're meant to do in this world, and that each one of us is imbued with a unique set of DNA that has never existed any time in the past and will not exist any time in the future, and that each one of us has a life's purpose that we should be looking for and finding to help us along our way.
He also has a way to figure out what your true destiny and passion are that is based on something that you probably haven't even thought about in decades. And I was really, really impressed when he gave us this tool.
And at the end of the episode, we have included a little snippet that was recorded before we sat down to officially begin the episode, where he describes his first meeting with 50 Cent. So stick around right till the end. And
Robert Greene, welcome to The Breakdown.
Break it down.
It's very exciting to have you here. I'm scared of you. I'm scared of you because
Good. I'm scared of her. So we're all even.
The reason I'm scared of you,
Scared of both of you.
Never heard that before. I'm scared of you in a friendly way. I'm scared of you in a way that I'm open to learning ways to not be scared of you. But, for lack of a better word, I'm scared of the power that you have as a writer. And you know, we're looking at this beautiful 25th anniversary edition of the 48 Laws of Power, which is really gorgeous. And if you tilt the side binding one way, it's your lovely face. And if you tilt the binding the other way, it's Machiavelli's face. And so,
Lovely too.
also lovely. And, when you're leafing through all the different laws of power, you get to choose, am I thinking about Robert or am I thinking about Machiavelli?
Right.
The reason that I have a certain amount of, trepidation is, I'm a person who was raised to really fear power. I was raised to, to distrust people in power. And my parents were, liberal activists. And so I was raised with this very, this, I think, somewhat healthy notion of be afraid of the people who wield power. That the underdog will not be spoken for unless someone speaks for them, that the disenfranchised need a voice. And for me, I was really raised with this notion of like, nobody really knows what I need except me. I shouldn't trust the government to tell me that, or even rabbis, or, have to find it for myself. What this book is, and what sort of, I mean, you've written several books, after this one. You're really, distilling down a tremendous amount of information, largely from a historical basis. Why should I not be afraid of you?
Well, I'm not necessarily the person. I don't operate by all 48 laws. Then you should be afraid of me if I did.
Hmm.
I basically, prior to publishing that book, I was somebody with not very much power. I did work for a while in Hollywood. I was low-level positions, and I was an observer. I'm an observer of power. Like Machiavelli himself, he was a mid-level diplomat during the Renaissance. He was not a powerful figure at all, right? But through the prints and his books, he became powerful. So you shouldn't be afraid of me as a person, because I'm actually more like the underdogs that you think about. And where the book comes from, which I think I'm now in many podcasts have broadcast this, but some people don't understand, is I was sort of angry and pissed off by the people I saw in Hollywood, how hypocritical they were, how they would pretend to be these nice liberal people, but they were incredibly manipulative. They were incredibly power hungry. And I didn't like that quality in them. And I wanted to reveal what goes on behind closed doors. People have these, like this law in there of crush your enemy totally. How evil is that? Well, I mean, in business, that's a law that people operate by. Google, Microsoft, Facebook, they can't abide having any kind of competition. They crush their enemies totally. I just wanted to reveal the truth of it and level the playing field, because power is this word, or is this kind of book of knowledge that basically was limited to white males for so many centuries, millennia, right? And only certain people knew these laws. And I just wanted to reveal it so everybody knows about it, so everybody can share in it, So like people like 50 who read the book and said it helped him a lot, because he said he didn't really need help, but he claims that it did. That the music industry is by far the sharkiest environment of all the businesses you could possibly enter into. And, laws like always say less than necessary, that's not something you necessarily learn on the streets, because he had street knowledge. It's the kind of thing that a king would use, or a powerful person in the past, or the head of a Hollywood studio back in the 30s or 40s. And so it kind of opens up the door to everyone to understand how these laws operate. So are you still afraid of me?
I'm less afraid.
Less afraid.
Less afraid. Well, I mean, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't.
Well, you should be a little bit afraid of me. I don't want you to
We don't want to get too comfortable here.
Yeah.
Well, I guess then I think what I'm more afraid of, if I'm, being more accurate, I guess I'm more afraid of of the people who would, live by all of these. And some of these make a lot of sense to
Yeah,
me.
they're not all evil at all.
No, they're not all evil. And actually, I hope you don't mind. I reviewed them with my 18-year-old who's about to enter college. He's, I think, a very thoughtful, very.
I'm sure he's very smart.
He's a very smart guy. He's intellectually oriented. He's a thinker, and we went through them, and surprisingly, a lot of them made a lot of sense to him. Meaning, he was thinking about them sort of in the framework of the society that he's been raised in, the culture that he's been, raised in. Try as I might to, not have him see lots of these things. One of the questions that he had, which I also had, is where does ethics come into this, or morals for you? And obviously, when you wrote it, you weren't writing a guidebook for living. This is really an historical and kind of philosophical treatise. I mean, it's phenomenal. But where do you see kind of a notion of ethics or morality here?
Well, I say the realm of power is an amoral realm. And I'm not saying that that's good or bad. I'm just saying that's the reality. Okay, so I'm generally, when I entered the work world, I was a naive person, and I got hurt a lot. It hurt me a lot because I'm very sensitive. So things like never outshine the master. I would outshine the master. I would get fired, and I wouldn't understand why I got fired, right? So being naive is very painful in this world. And so I wanted to kind of help people a lot with the book. But if I'm preaching and if I'm going in the preface, only use this if you're good and behave, I don't think that's the right tone to have. I like to see my readers as adults, not as children. I don't like preaching to people. I like them to make their own decisions, their own mind up. Ethics is up to you as an individual. So if you try telling an 18-year-old, you know very well, this is how you should behave, this is what's ethically correct, he'll say the equivalent of, go buzz off.
Right.
I want to do things my way. I don't like preaching. It's something very innate in me. I want people to find their own way to it. So I'm showing you what the laws of power are, to pick out one that is, I'd say, particularly nasty, and I own it. I wrote the damn book. Get others to do the work, but always take the credit. Law number 7. Okay.
I mean, that's Hollywood. That's literally Hollywood.
That is how that was the story of my life.
Yeah.
I worked for a screenwriter. He was a good man. I'm not going to say anything bad about him, but I would write whole parts of dialogue for his movies that he would direct. Never got any credit for it. Nobody ever acknowledged that. I did all the research for his stuff. I never got any credit for it. Basically, I wasn't saying I was the brains behind the operation. No way, but I did a lot and nobody ever put my name on it. And at first it kind of hurt me. Like I want to have people acknowledge that I did all this work, that some of this witty dialogue they were laughing at was actually mine. But, that's just the way the world is. And you have to accept it. If I had accepted it at that time and understood this is how the world operates, I would have been able to deal with it better. Instead of getting defensive and neurotic and upset about it, I would have just said, all right, Robert, this is how people operate in Hollywood. Someday you're going to turn the tables on them. You're going to deal with it calmly and rationally. You're not going to get all emotional about it. So I tell you, my view of ethics is, it's not my complete, my view of ethics is more complicated than that, but I'm studying ancient Greek. I was a classics major, right? And the Greeks had this notion that more harm is caused in this world by people who are stupid and incompetent than by those who are truly evil. Because often the stupid and the incompetent think they're good, and they do all these they launch wars that are awful. The people who launched the Iraq War in 2001, they thought they were good, or whatever year that was. They were doing the good thing. They were moral people, but it was stupid and it had terrible consequences, So I wanted people to be less stupid and less incompetent in dealing with power, so their lives would be easier, so they wouldn't outshine the master, so they wouldn't have the pain that I had. They'd understand it better. I'm not saying I'm a paragon of virtue, and I'm not at all. But ethics is complicated. It can't be reduced to something simple. So I hope in my own way, I'm kind of answering your question.
Oh, for sure. Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is supported by Wild Grain. Wild Grain is the first ever bake from frozen subscription box for sourdough breads, fresh pastas, and artisanal pastries. Every item bakes from frozen in 25 minutes or less, no thawing required, which is super awesome. The team at Wild Grain just sent me a new box. There's so much delicious stuff inside. I'm going to tell you about it. One way you can show love to your family and yourself is by preparing fresh meals at home. It's something I try and do more of. But on weeknights especially, that can be hard. Save time without skimping on delicious with the help of Wild Grain. I love the breads. My kids love the breads. Bread is one of those things that I like to have accompany every meal, if possible. And there was several to choose from, but sourdough is kind of a standard in our house, so that was our favorite. You can fully customize your Wild Grain box, so you can choose any combinations of breads, pastas, and pastries. You can even build a box of only breads, only pastas, or only pastries if you'd like. Plus, for a limited time, you can get $30 off the first box. Plus, free croissants in every box when you go to wildgrain.com/break to start your subscription. You heard me, free croissants in every box and $30 off your first box when you go to wildgrain.com/break. That's wildgrain.com/break, or you can use promo code BREAK at checkout. Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is supported by Quince. Shifting my wardrobe from summer to fall is a challenge I think most people can relate to, especially if you live somewhere like Southern California, where some of our hottest days tend to be in early fall. The weather's very hard to predict from one week to the next, and luckily, Quince offers timeless and high-quality items that I love, ensuring my wardrobe stays fresh and I don't blow my budget. Like cashmere sweaters from $50, pants for every occasion, washable silk tops, and so much more. The best part, all Quince items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. By partnering directly with top factories, Quince cuts out the cost of the middleman and passes the savings on to us. And Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes. We love that. Jonathan loves his classic Italian wool overcoat, perfect for cold weather, but he likes to wear it in the summer too. It dresses up all of his outfits. Make switching seasons a breeze with Quince's high-quality closet essentials. Go to quince.com/breakdown for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/breakdown to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/breakdown.
Let's take a step back and explain what we mean by power. For someone who may not be, pursuing a CEO role or an executive role, but what strikes me about your work is that it applies to everyone no matter what situation you're in.
Yeah.
So being more aware of it. But let's start like sort of the beginner's guide, the introduction. What do we mean by power?
Well, the first thing is when you enter the realm of power, which when you're a child, you're not really in that unless you've got abusive parents in some cases. But it's more or less either when you enter college or more realistic when you enter the work world. Now you're in the realm of power, okay? And so I'm saying that you cannot get out of it. Once you're in it, that's it, right? And so if you're trying not to play the power game, if you say, I'm not interested in power, that is a maneuver in the power game. You are implicated in it. You are trying to pretend that you're moral, that you're above it all. That is a power move. So the idea behind it, to answer your question more directly, is the feeling of the human being is basically, we come into the world somewhat weak, right? As a baby, we're crying. Unlike any other animal, we spend an incredibly long period being dependent, right? So powerlessness, feeling that we have no control over the world, is very built into our nervous system, right? And we cannot stand the feeling of being powerless, of feeling helpless. It's very primal emotion built in. And so we're all scrambling for some degree of control over the world. So the idea that I cannot influence at all my children, I cannot influence my spouse, I have no influence or persuasive powers over my boss, over my colleagues, is deeply, deeply painful, right? We can't stand it. So we're going to try in some way to get power over it. So there's so much in life you can't control. If I were to pick out a number, I would say 95% of life is circumstances that are completely beyond your control, namely death itself, but a lot of other things, okay? So power is the ability to maybe on the margins to have a little bit more influence than you would have had if you're completely ignorant, if you're completely helpless, if you don't understand anything about power, right? So it's the degree to which you can kind of influence and move people and not feel that helpless feeling like, when an animal is on its belly, it feels completely vulnerable and it freaks out, right? Well, we get that feeling too sometimes, and it's not a good feeling. So to the degree that you have confidence that you can direct the course of your life, that you're not just simply open to any circumstances aren't pushing you around, that is the feeling of power. It's also the degree of power over yourself, self-mastery, mastering your own emotions, etc. So it's that slight margin of control that kind of knowledge can bring you, and I think is how I would define it.
I like the idea of direct control or influence over your life. So I think tangential words that I hear is influence, agency, being able to direct control. And I've heard you speak about our emotions. We're taught a lot these days to feel our emotions and process our emotions. But can you talk about sort of the risk there in terms of the relationship to self-control and mastery in the pursuit of power?
Well, it's a misconception that people may have about me or about power that you want to suppress your emotions. Emotions are extremely important to the human being. You can't be creative, you can't think, you can't write a book, you can't make a movie, you can't be successful without some kind of emotional background, something powerful motivating you. Your desire to have power is what's going to make you kind of try and get it, right? Things like ambition or whatever. For me, it's a desire to write a really good book, something that's very true or real. So if I didn't have any emotions, I wouldn't be able to write my books. And actually, a lot of anger is what impels me to write a book. But the thing about emotions is that when you feel an emotion, so many things are much more complex than we imagine they are. We use language, and language is just kind of this screen that doesn't really describe reality. Emotions are very complex. They're not simple. They're a mix of things. They're just basically these hormones churning up inside of these chemicals that we ascribe anger or love, etc. But they're more complex than that. And so you operate on an emotion, but you don't understand it. You're not thinking about it. You're not analyzing. You don't know where it comes from. And actually, your anger might be mixed with envy. It might be mixed with even love. It might be mixed with things you're not even thinking about. So you need to apply intelligence to your emotions, not suppress them, but try to understand them. So in the moment, if you're feeling a powerful emotion, you want to be able to have the ability to step back, not react, not send that angry, mean email or whatever it is that you were contemplating, and go, what am I really feeling? Not just the word that I ascribe to it, but maybe there's something deeper. Maybe there's something about my partner that's irritating me, or maybe there's something from my childhood that's being triggered. I don't know. You're probably never going to solve the mystery. But analyzing your own emotions is just a really, really powerful tool for people to start developing, I think. And it's not something anybody teaches, which shocks me. It's not this kind of emotional intelligence where even a psychoanalyst would tell you, here's what the process that you go through to try and understand. Nobody talks about this. And so sometimes I wonder if I'm answering a question, if I've gone off the deep end. Pardon me.
I think you are 100% answering it.
Okay.
I mean, Mayim and I talk a lot about the need for understanding what is driving us.
Yeah.
And to unpack it. I mean, Mayim, I've learned a lot. Mayim talks openly about her therapeutic journey, using that as a space to better understand emotions and to try and both hold space for them to process them. Because as you mentioned, if you suppress them, then they cause all sorts of other problems. And then if you act only on them without an analysis, then you're going to cause a whole other realm of problems that are equally devastating as if you were to suppress them.
Just to give you a quick example, take, for instance, somebody who was very young. Let's just describe it. Just say it's a male whose parent or mother or father wasn't very bonding with them, right? They were kind of neglected. They felt abandoned as a child, right? And all sorts of issues kind of evolved. Their whole personality kind of formed around this sense of feeling abandoned. And later in life, they've completely kind of gotten over. They don't really think about this at all. They're in relationships with girlfriends, etc. And they have a pattern, which is
I could guess. Go ahead.
as things are starting to maybe get good or intimate, they break it off.
Yeah.
Their pattern is they have to be the one abandoning the other. That's their way of reversing that feeling of helplessness, of powerlessness that I'm talking about. They do this over and over and over again, always blaming the woman. They'll always find her, she did something, she was being too intrusive, she wasn't giving me my space, whatever. They don't have any self-awareness of how a pattern has emerged from their 2 or 3-year-old childhood that is ruining their life, right? So imagine all the people in this world wandering around doing things without any kind of basic awareness.
It's like most humans.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is.
The psychologist, your parents probably knew about him because he was a Marxist, Wilhelm Reich. He called it the emotional plague. And he was thinking that just people are walking around with this emotional plague, spreading it around to everyone else.
How do you know all this?
How do I know all this?
Yeah, where did you learn it? Like, were you a person that was raised in an emotionally intelligent home? Is this something you learned for yourself? Did you go to therapy and like it?
No. Well, my mom watches this show. My mom is 97 years old.
Wow.
But
So am I.
You're not 97.
A little bit inside.
You're half that.
Yeah. Well,
Exactly half. Are you 48?
I'm 48.
That's a good number. Anyway, so, I was kind of neglected a lot as a child. And not in a necessarily negative way. A lot of it's a generational thing. I was just left alone, right? So I didn't have a lot of support. And my sister, who I'm extremely close to, she's older, 4 years older. She was the person I was actually very close to and kind of saved me that way. But when you're like that, what happens to a lot of people like that, and I've seen this pattern, is you become very observant of others, right? Because it's your protection. It's the shield.
Hypervigilance, yeah.
Yeah. So in order not to feel that kind of sense of neglect and being powerless and people can hurt you, you want to observe and you want to see through them and you want to understand them. So since I was very young, I've always been aware that people are pretending to be something that they're not, and a lot of adolescents, it's not that shocking. A lot of adolescents have that because they look at their parents and they say, God, you're wearing a mask all the time. Be real, man. Be and particularly my generation, because your generation isn't quite so conventional like my parents were, I just saw that they're wearing a mask. They're playing a role. What is the truth? What is really going on behind them? So to answer your question, it comes from years and years and suffering and pain, making mistakes, observing people very deeply, and you build up a kind of a muscle. So in my last book, I talk about nonverbal communication. I can sense things right away about people that are inevitably accurate because I've been doing it for so long. It's not like I'm superior or anything. Just I've been doing this for so long. So therapy, books, no, it's like observing people, being in the moment and observing them. Because if you're filled with theories of Freud and all these other people, you're not observing. You're using preconceived notions. And people are weird. They're different. They're individuals. I look at each one and I'm in the moment and I'm observing it. So that's sort of where it comes from.
I wonder if you can speak a little bit more about this. I don't even want to call it a perception. I think in many cases it's not a perception. It's just an accurate understanding. The notion of, this is something Jonathan talks about a lot, feeling as a child that everyone's working an angle of some sort. I was often accused, and still am often accused of, well, you know what? I'm just gonna,
Uh-oh.
I'm gonna pull it up. Yeah, I believe it is,
I'll tell you.
I think it's 10.
Infection?
Yeah, infection. That's
Okay.
well, I mean, I'm sure you
Oh.
know them all by heart.
I do.
So law 10, I took very personally, which is not your fault. Avoid the unhappy and unlucky. You can die from someone else's misery. Emotional states are as infectious as diseases. You may feel you are helping the drowning man, but you are only precipitating your own disaster. The unfortunate sometimes draw misfortune on themselves. They will also draw it on you. Associate with the happy and fortunate instead. So I took this personally because I actually, I mean, I don't want to say that. Let's just go with happiness and a state of unhappiness. For me, I feel like a lot of my unhappiness is based on what I see as a very accurate reflection of the world around me, which I believe is quite depressing. And, I was raised with a very strong, a keen set of attention to injustice. And, not to say that that's all that I was raised with, but my DNA, created a person very, very sensitive. And I think that has made for a very specific profile. And I think it's a lot of other things, like add trauma, add add the Holocaust, like add whatever you want. But this made me anxious because it kind of feels like that's a reaction to what you're talking about. Like if you have a perception that people are not well-intentioned or people are abusing power, it's made for a lot of unhappiness for me. And then I got nervous that like now I'm an infection. Now I'm law 10. I'm the person that you're warning people about.
Well, you mean you're the infecting person?
Yes.
You're
Well, I'm
infecting people.
unhappy if I'm unhappy. And I can be a real downer. You want to attest to this?
It's true.
Well, yeah, wow.
You get what I'm saying? Like I'm
Yeah.
taking that sort of like that sensitivity, that vigilance. My Bialik's Breakdown is supported by Ritual. I wish someone had told me at the start of pregnancy that it was going to get a lot harder. Being a parent was going to get a lot harder than even I thought pregnancy was, but also it gets a lot more amazing. So many women experience anxiety around conceiving and pregnancy, but you can worry less with Ritual. Get the key nutrients needed to support pregnancy and feel confident with Ritual's Essential for Women prenatal multivitamin designed to deliver 12 key nutrients for pregnancy in just 2 daily capsules. It's easy and painless to incorporate Ritual products into my daily routine, and I especially love that they're vegan friendly. Ritual's prenatal multivitamin is designed for mom to baby support with vegan, bioavailable, and science-backed key nutrients. Methylated folate and nature-identical choline support baby's neural tube development. Omega-3 DHA for brain and early vision development, support from mom to baby. Also contains vitamin D to support fetal bone health and is designed with morning sickness in mind. Thank you. Each capsule features a delayed release design to help make it gentle on an empty stomach. Every bottle includes a citrus essence tab so you can enjoy taking your multis. Ritual is also rigorously tested by a third party for allergens, microbes, and heavy metals. It's super important to know what you're putting into your body, especially when you're pregnant. And with Ritual's dedication to traceable science and sourcing, you always will. See for yourself with 25% off your first month for a limited time at ritual.com/breakdown. My Bialik's Breakdown is supported by BetterHelp. I have a handful of self-care non-negotiables. For example, I really, really try not to skip therapy, no matter what comes up. I try and do yoga twice a week, and I'm setting aside time to meditate daily. When your schedule's packed with kids' activities, work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even when we know what makes us happy, it's sometimes hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. No matter what is going on in your life, I highly recommend you do not eliminate therapy, or if you're not in therapy, think about giving it a try. It's one of those things that I do not want to live without. I used to think I can go without it, but I now know it's what keeps things working smoothly all week, all month, and all year long. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire. They'll match you with a licensed therapist. You can switch at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/break today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/break.
Something struck me while you're talking that I haven't realized about you before.
Uh-oh.
And
whenever somebody says something like that,
Now I should hold hands with Robert because I don't know what's going to happen next.
well, I want to actually bring this to the group and get
Okay.
Robert's perception. While you were talking about that, seeing the things that are troubling you about the world, what I heard was that you have an enormous amount of anger at the system. And if that anger isn't channeled some way and expressed towards a purpose, and that we can tie this into finding one's purpose in life, then you're going to be depressed. Like depression as a signal, as a messenger versus as a genetic state. There's a difference there. And I'm wondering if, you are highly sensitive, highly attuned to the things that are troubling in the world. And maybe it is a practice of seeing the positive things, and we know that the brain can adjust and reorient to be more focused on positive. But also maybe there's a repressed anger.
Do you feel like you're infecting the people around you?
Sometimes.
Like your son?
I have 2 boys, so I've infected
2
both
boys.
of them. I will say that, I think for a lot of our, listeners or viewers, like for people who experience some level of, mental health challenge, depression is a really, really sticky one. But aspects of anxiety or trauma, like when those things stay with you, like, it's impacted the whole house, and now that I have one going off to college, it's kind of like, hey, I didn't drink or do drugs, but I bet at times it felt like something was going on that you couldn't understand. And for people who grow up in alcoholism, it's like, oh, when you realize it, it's like, oh, that's what was going on. Our house was driven by someone's, dis-ease, and they were trying to fix it and make it better. So like, even though my kids didn't grow up with that, they grew up with, someone carrying this weight. And I don't know. I think, infect is a strong term. And with all of these, I was like, I see where he's like, I knew enough about history to be like, oh, I get where this law comes from. Or I knew enough about Jay-Z and 50 Cent to be like, I get it. I understand why this is banned in prisons. But yeah, I think that for me, like Law 10 was, gosh, can I be among people, or am I going to bring them down to the point that I'm like taking their power away because I'm infecting them with my sadness?
Okay, well, a lot of the problem people have with the 48 Laws of Power is they read that initial paragraph, but they don't actually dive in deeply into the chapter itself. And what I'm really describing in that chapter is mostly people who are deeply narcissistic, right? And they're addicted to drama, right? For whatever reason. That's their form of getting attention. That's their form of getting power. And we see this in political people whose names I will not mention right now, right? Who use that very much to continually stir up drama on a national stage, right?
Okay.
And they're going to infect you with that, but they don't appear to be that. So I don't think this fits you, really.
Okay, I feel better.
So they appear to be charming people who are very charismatic. They've learned confident, yes. They've learned to and it's attractive to people. And then you get in a relationship and you realize that you're continually caught up in their emotional maelstroms, right? And they pick on people who they know are caring and giving and sensitive because they're easy prey. And so you get involved with them, not realizing that they have this infecting quality.
Okay.
And they draw you down deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper until you're feeling all sorts of emotions, because their whole thing is to create drama, make you emotional and to react. So, sorry.
No, go.
So you're not doing that to your boys, right?
No.
And you're not like a deep narcissist this.
So this is what you're describing, and we've talked a lot about narcissism here, and it really is this sort of like, for lack of a better word, it's a little bit of a pop psych. Like everybody, he's a narcissist or she's a narcissist.
Of course.
But when we talk about classical and clinical narcissism, what you're describing is in many ways what a lot of people who have a truly narcissistic parent experience.
For sure.
Like that's really interesting to me. I mean, it's it's a tool of power, right? Narcissism is a tool of power, or is power a tool of narcissism?
Well, some people who are deeply narcissistic don't get very much power.
Right.
They're
Or they find ways to get power however they can, like from their family
yeah.
or home, if they can't
there's
have it
like
in other
the
ways.
deeply introverted narcissist who
right.
has very, very low self-esteem.
Right.
They're not going to be, but the ones who, like the Elon Musks who are out there, and he's what I call a deep narcissist. I make the comparison in human nature that we are all self-absorbed. We all have a touch of narcissism. So get off this idea that there are just some people out there.
Right.
It's in all humans. So, don't be so judgmental, okay? But there are deep narcissists who can't control it. Their level of narcissism is at a different level. So people like this have learned early on. They're like 7 or 8 years old. And deep narcissists generally have one of two parental patterns. I know I'm simplifying, and I'm venturing into the realm of pop psychology here, so excuse me. But they either have the incredibly neglectful parent that has abandoned them, right? And is off in their own world, right? Like a narcissist themselves. Or the suffocating parent that was on top of them so often and helicoptering them, et cetera. So they had no space to kind of create a self inside of them that they could love, that they could appreciate. So they learn when they're 6 or 7 years old that by acting out, by being dramatic, by getting attention, they have power. Attention is power for them. And they use that continually throughout their life. And because they learn when they were 7 to do this, they become great actors. They know how to put it on. They actually become actors, a lot of them in life, right? So it can become a form of power. It depends on, I know some narcissists who are very deeply troubled, and they're of that introspective variety. So I think it just depends on the type of bonding and some of the genetics, because like Jung thought the introvert-extrovert thing is a genetic thing, which we still don't know to this day, but anyway.
You've spoken about narcissism and that we all have narcissism.
Yes.
And that we should embrace that to some degree. Obviously not to the depth of an absolute narcissist who is using it as a power tactic. But can you talk a little bit about the embrace of our dark side and why that's helpful for people?
Well, so the most important thing for a human being is self-awareness. If you're aware of yourself, if you're aware of what motivates you, if you're aware of what you truly love, of what you truly hate, you're going to be a much more fulfilled human being. But so many people lack complete self-awareness, right? And so they like to moralize, they like to judge other people. Well, he's the narcissist, she's passive-aggressive, they're full of envy, they have the dark side. They never look at themselves, right? You are all full of this dark energy. It is built into the human being. When you were 3 or 4 years old, you acted out on all of these raw emotions. You weren't socialized yet. You were a complete natural creature. I like comparing it to like a round ball. And then slowly you become half of that, and you have a mask, and you repress all of those other things that are going on when you were a child, right? And you become this person that is socialized, that has learned to get along with other people. But it's not really who you are. And so to become aware, for instance, when I wrote that chapter on narcissism, I was going, whoa, Robert, you actually are quite a narcissist. You never thought of yourself as a narcissist, but man, you've got these qualities here. And it was kind of painful. It was kind of weird. And I'm still thinking about it. It still kind of hurts me a little bit, but it's better that I'm aware of it, because now I can see it in operation. I can see how I'm doing this, how that narcissist within me is coming out and how it can hurt other people.
What was the voice? What was the thoughts that you were having, like when you realized that about yourself? Like what emerged that you were like, oh, wait a second, that's coming from a place that you didn't realize you had?
I can't remember exactly what it was that I was writing about in that chapter, but I was recognizing some of the patterns. So I had some key figures that I was analyzing, like Joseph Stalin is, to me, the greatest narcissist who ever lived. But there was also Robert Oppenheimer. And the actual figure, Robert Oppenheimer, is much more interesting than that movie portrayed. But he was a deeply flawed individual. And I recognized when I was in my 20s, my narcissism probably was kind of hurtful. And I'm much more in control of it now then. But I think a lot of it was recognizing it when I was young. And I would do things like, I remember I was staying with this family in France. They let me have their apartment for a month in the south of France. And then I come back to California, and they were so angry with me. They left this message. They visited my parents. I had rung up a phone bill of like thousands of dollars, and I never realized it, Just kind of using people for things, using them and not thinking about it. Kind of seeing what in psychology they call self-objects, that people are kind of objects that you can use for your own benefit. I had some of those traits, reviewing things where I hurt people in the past inevitably stemmed from my lack of empathy and my lack of self-awareness.
But the place where sort of that pivot point is, like where you're not a sociopath, is that you can learn from. Well, I don't know, but I'm guessing that the idea is for us to learn from those, right? To learn to have a sense of, what we try to teach in children is a sense of remorse, right? Or teaching sort of consequences. Like, when you do this, that person is crying, right? But I have a lot of issues with, kind of this notion, of like forcing children to say they're sorry, forcing children. Right. And it's like, to me, I was always about, I'm trying to teach an understanding of an association that elicits what, if you don't have a sociopathic child, is a human response of that person is crying because of an action. What's the dynamic here? And you teach that in an age-appropriate way.
Teaching these things, I haven't had children, so I'm just bloviating here. I'm able to say whatever. I haven't gone through that trauma. But, it's very complicated to like teach that kind of remorse sort of thing. Because if you impose people on them, you say, this is how you're supposed to feel.
Right.
It's not real. And they'll apologize, but they're not feeling the emotion.
Right.
It's not registering deep within them.
Maybe you should have had kids. I don't know.
Yeah, but you have to be tricky. You have to lead them to things without them knowing that you're leading them into it.
You really have to be cut out for it. I don't know that I was. Here we are.
Too late now.
I wonder if we can move into
how we get children, which is seduction.
Seduction. So besides the 48 Laws of Power, you've written books on, many other kind of equally significant and, important ideas. And one of them is seduction. Yeah. And seduction is, this is just my sort of paraphrasing. It's part of power, right? Yeah. Any system that has power typically is going to involve some element of seduction. To me, like when I hear seduction, like, and maybe this is just because I, was raised as a female person, like all I hear is manipulation. And I feel badly to say that. Well, it's just like a thing.
You just deflated
Robert.
Deflated
Robert Greene.
Just folded in half.
No, and I think
balloons, all the air left out.
And looking at sort of the some of the examples that you draw on, for understanding seduction. A lot of these are difficult and complicated personalities or entities.
What do you mean? Some of them are very positive.
Okay, go
Malcolm
ahead. You
X,
go first.
John F. Kennedy. His campaign in 1960 was a mass political seduction.
Correct.
I am.
Yes.
So I don't mean to cut you off, and
I
will get.
He also publicly had, a very specific, affair with Marilyn Monroe that, like, at the time, obviously was like, it's like a funny little thing, but there's complexity here, I think, in light of the generation that, we're in now of like, it's power, right? Those are, anyway, okay. Help me through this.
Things are more complicated. So can we say that maybe Marilyn Monroe seduced John F. Kennedy?
Also possible.
Yes.
But,
why? Why not?
I don't need to tell you about a feminist perspective, but a feminist perspective would also say that when women are raised in the structure of a a patriarchal power system, we're taught to use certain tools because in many cases and in many times, those are the only tools that we've been given. And I'm a second wave feminist. I'm like a Hillary Clinton pantsuit or die kind of person. So, I understand that third and fourth wave is turning that on its head. I'm just 97 years old, like your mom.
Wow, boy, am I being put on the defensive here?
No, I'm asking you to help me.
Yeah,
if
I have a
anyone
way
can.
to help you if you want a map here.
Well, I'll try and then you help me out.
Perfect.
You bail me out when I get in trouble. I think of it in kind of primitive ways. So seduction is kind of like a mating ritual. It's sort of a ritual that we go through where we're kind of having this sort of back and forth dynamic with the other person. And we're playing on their psychology and they're playing on our psychology. And I come from a different background than you, obviously a different generation. I've always been fascinated by like the 18th century, and particularly in France. It's sort of subject I studied a lot. And although Casanova's Italian, it was this kind of culture of seduction, heavily involved with the theater. Okay, it's a patriarchal culture, right? But I can still understand it without going back using those kind of labels here, right? And so for women, yes, seduction was the only game that they had, right? For seducing the king, et cetera, for Madame de Pompadour, et cetera. But I loved
Esther.
Yeah.
Esther and
Queen
Ahasuerus.
Esther.
Yeah.
So I love the theatrical playfulness of it, right? The element of play where I'm not so involved with my ego and who I am, but I'm entering this kind of theatrical realm where I'm playing with appearances and men are doing this to women and women are doing this to men. And it's kind of like this elegant dance that people are doing. So seduction involves vulnerability to another person. And to me, it's a kind of mental disease that I see a lot in the world today where people are totally invulnerable. They don't want to open themselves to they don't want to open themselves to any kind of hurt. And so
What does that look like?
To me, it looks like somebody that can't fall in love. So the ability to let go and to let somebody else into your psychology, into your psyche, and to let them kind of become a part of you to the point where you could become pain, where they can hurt you, they could abandon you, but you learn from it and you grow from it and you develop from it. And the ability to be vulnerable is what makes a great artist in any kind of realm. It makes a person creative. And I think there's a lot of people now who are desperately afraid to let go, desperately afraid to be vulnerable. And I think seduction, it's a book that has all those evil connotations that you're referring to. But people are so fascinated with it because I think they recognize that it's actually something that they want. They want that kind of power.
Who has more power, the seducer or the seducee?
Well, they both have power. So in the classic example that I use in The Art of Seduction comes from Dangerous Liaisons, one of my favorite books.
Liaisons dangereuses.
Les liaisons dangereuses, très bien, oui, tu parles français?
I do not speak French.
Oh, okay. But you got
I read a
your
lot of
pronunciation
Sartre, a
is
lot of
very good.
Camus, and some French movies.
Well, your pronunciation was very good.
Thank you.
Um,
An actor.
So the main character is Valmont, who's this evil seducer of women. He ruins all of their reputations, right?
Daniel Day-Lewis in the American version.
Yes, that's right. And Michelle Pfeiffer.
Michelle Pfeiffer, that's right.
And so he decides he's going to seduce La Présidente de Tourvel, which I think is the Michelle Pfeiffer character, because she's a prude. She's the most prudish woman of all. To seduce her would be the greatest feather in his cap, right? Because she's impossible to seduce. And then what ends up happening, he tries, she's completely not into him at all because she knows his horrible reputation. And as he tries further and harder and harder, he suddenly finds that he's falling in love with her. He's never fallen in love with any woman before, perhaps because she won't yield to him, whatever the reason is, he's falling in love. And as he falls in love with her, she begins to open up to him. And then the seduction happens. And to me, the lesson is, if you're completely a cold seducer, it doesn't really work. There's no pleasure involved. And if it's a man being that to a woman, the woman kind of sees through it and is put off. But if you're the kind of seducer that is falling in love with the seduced, if the seduced is seducing you, you will be a better seducer, right?
In that
Are
way,
you going to rescue me now?
you did a great
That
job.
was very, very lovely.
You didn't need me at all.
Oh, all right.
But it sounds, it removes the level of manipulation if two people are exchanging an experience, both of them opening up and being vulnerable. It removes that element of being done to or something wrong happening.
Let me not make myself out to be the angel that I might appear to be. There is manipulation involved in that book for sure. I don't deny it, and I own it. But that's certainly not all there is to it, you know. And I'm fascinated by the psychology that involved in there and what ties it all together. So what ties a great courtesan seducing some French businessman in the 19th century and draining his bank accounts? What ties that to John F. Kennedy seducing the American public? What ties that to Pamela Harriman seducing all these different men as this incredible charmer? What ties that to Josephine Baker and Marlene Dietrich, et cetera, et cetera? What is the psychology involved? Fascinated me. And I couldn't find a book written on that subject. So I wanted to tie them all together and show that there's some very elemental form of psychology involved, which is essentially creating the lure of pleasure, right? Because we're all kind of repressed. We don't have enough pleasure in our lives, right? Particularly nowadays. And to give somebody the sense that through you, they can have some kind of adventure, they can have some sort of weird, pleasurable experience is incredibly powerful. And it ties John F. Kennedy's seduction of the American public in 1960. I'm going to return you to it's called the New Frontier. We're going back to the 19th century. We're going back to America the way it is. The frontier will be outer space. We're going to create this, that, and the other thing. It's incredibly seductive, incredibly pleasurable, because it was built on all of the myths that America is built on.
I mean, you could argue that the movement of Obama enthusiasm, I mean, that was also, it was
a total seduction.
I think we should establish that when we're talking about seduction, we're not only talking about sexual seduction.
Yeah.
That we're talking about, I like this notion of the infiltration of ideas. The notion that you have to be vulnerable enough to have, be able to consider something else.
Well, I just very quickly, one of my favorite philosophers is Friedrich Nietzsche. And in one of his earliest books, he talks about empathy. And he says, when he reads a book, he tries to understand and get inside the spirit of the person who wrote it. Not trying to judge it at all, but trying to genuinely feel the voice behind it and who wrote it and why. So he drops all of his critical skills and he just kind of lets himself immerse in the book. He lets it seduce him. He uses the word seduction all the time. And I feel like people often come to a book or an idea with their own preconceptions, their clothes. That's what I talk about invulnerable. This is what the world is like. These are the labels I prescribe to it. And they don't understand what someone else is trying to say, right? So you can disagree with it, and I try to read books that way. Like I have people whose books I absolutely loathe and I disagree 100% with, and I will name a name, Steven Pinker. I never like his books. I'm the opposite of him, whatever that would be in science fiction terms. But I try and read his books and I try and say, well, maybe there's some wisdom there. Maybe I'm missing it. And I let him seduce me initially.
That's a very old school perspective though. Like, meaning I agree. I was raised to read things that I don't agree with and find the reasons why. And I went to graduate school and for like 7 years, that's what you do.
Yeah.
But what I've noticed is very unpopular is people really are resistant to being seduced.
God, that's what I'm talking about, the invulnerability.
Yeah.
So let an idea
like they want to read things that they agree with.
Yeah.
And follow the people that they agree with, right?
Yeah.
Do we think it's an increase in camps and division, or do we think it's also a part of people don't know how to come back to themselves? So they're so concerned about having their mind changed or having their identity changed because they think that their identity is associated with, I believe, this set of narratives that only exist over here on the left or over here on the right. That
I have my answer, but I'm curious what Robert says.
Well, I mean, it's a $1 million question I could go hours for, but I believe there's a great book that I often refer to called The Fall of Public Man
Mm.
by, oh God, I'm sorry, I'm just blanking out. Richard Sennett.
Richard Sennett,
Uh,
that's right.
And he traces the narcissism in our culture back to the 19th century. And it's a book that heavily influenced me when we talk about theater and seduction, because he talks about cafe culture in the 18th century and then how in the 19th century it all became about your identity and your politics and who you belonged to and the group that you were with. People became very defensive, very close-minded. And his model is kind of the urban environment, like a New York City, where you're mingling with people from all different ethnicities, all different races. You're getting in all these different ideas, all these different perspectives are flooding through you, and it kind of makes you a rich urban person, an intelligent person. So a lot of it is that, but I think a lot of young people have grown up in a very, very chaotic environment. A lot of it from technology, however, and then there was 9/11, there was the crash of '08, there was the pandemic, etc. And when you're dealing with chaos and crises, the tendency is to become very defensive and very insecure. And you don't want that openness to other people's ideas. You want to get into your camp where everyone thinks is certain and secure and you know all the answers. And to me, knowledge and wisdom is something, I go back to Socrates, is admitting that you're ignorant, that you don't know. You don't know anything. And that's the beginning of knowledge. And that's so alien to our culture, to how people are today.
I mean, I think we're seeing it play out politically also, not just here, but, some might say in France. You're seeing a really strong desire for someone to fix it, for someone to tell you absolutely what's wrong and how to fix it. And what this leads to is, this kind of extreme tribalism, and it leads to scapegoating. Yeah. So kind of adjacent to this sort of cafe society, which I admit I don't know as much about as I would like to, a lot of kind of going back to the sort of seduction playground. Well, many people are using, online dating sites, for example, as a way to meet people, or people are meeting, in ways that don't involve, let's say, the old-fashioned ways we used to do it. And I always lament, like, once I left grad school, I kind of didn't know how to socialize, because that was where I socialized. And
Was where?
well, like, you'd go to talks, or you'd go to lectures, or you had students that you knew.
I see.
Like, once I kind of left that, it's like bars, like, what is this? Clubs? Like, that's not for me. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit. It sort of combines a question about seduction, right? And I'm really taken with this notion, and it kind of is throughout, but definitely in a few laws in particular, about this persona that we create, right? The masks that we wear, which, as you sort of pointed out, for those of us who grew up in any state of sort of hypervigilance, you see that everyone's wearing a mask, even the people who are supposed to, protect you and care for you. How is that? How do you see that sort of playing out in this sort of field of trying to find connection and love, when we literally have a system that is designed for people to create a persona that in many cases is really not even close to them?
Yeah. Well, the online world, because I'm so old that I have no experience with it at all. For me, back in the day, it was bars, it was clubs, it was meeting people through friends, and having to literally put your whole self-esteem on the line by asking a girl on a date or something like that, right? So I don't really have much understanding, but I think it's very destructive, because we're humans. We have mirror neurons. We have things where we relate to people on a physiological level that cannot be replicated through any kind of technological or algorithm, right? And so people are losing social skills. They're losing the ability to enter into the spirit of another person. They're losing the empathic muscle that happens when you're constantly socializing. So when I read like a Jane Austen novel from like 1820, it's astounding how she is so insanely observant about people because that's all they had. They were continually socializing. They had no internet. They had no television. It was just parties, salons, people playing the piano, etc. Social. You developed this muscle where you understood people. That's all atrophying with this new generation, right?
Yeah.
So seduction is the ability to enter into the spirit of the other person and understand them on a deeper level and get into what makes them tick. So it can be, on my scale, a very healthy thing. Yes, that can be used for manipulation. So a lot of sociopaths actually are good at figuring out what you like and then using it to manipulate. So I don't deny that. But if you are not a sociopath, you're using this to actually understand what other people are like and what is making them tick. And so I forget what your original question, because I wanted to get back to it.
Yeah, I was talking about just online dating and the wearing of masks.
Oh, the
as
wearing
sort
of
like
masks,
that is
yeah.
literally the tool of seduction, is to sort of create this persona. Like here's me holding a beer on a boat.
But then
here's me with my cat.
Right. But then you're going to meet the person, and they're not at all like the persona they created online. You know.
Well, I think. I live in Los Angeles. You do too. I meet plenty of people who are just about the mask that they create. Meaning, there's not a lot there, right? Because there's been so much emphasis placed on what I look like and what my body looks like, and where I'm eating and what designer yoga bra I'm wearing.
Well, to me, that's not what seduction's about.
Right.
Seduction is a psychological game. It's not about the lipstick you wear and the low-cut dress and the beefed-up body that you have. It's completely antithetical. And what I like to use in the book were examples of men and women who are not very attractive, but who are masters of the game of seduction, of playing on people's psychology.
This is the title of the episode. Can unattractive people be good seducers?
Well, one of the greatest male seducers of all time was an Italian poet named Gabriele D'Annunzio. You can look him up. He was hideously ugly. He was short. Unfortunately, Mussolini was very much inspired by him. But he was not attractive, and women would say that. But he had a gift of language. He was, he could entrance any woman off her feet by how he talked. And I say in seduction, based on all the research, that is generally a weakness that a lot of women have.
I was going to say,
who's a really good talker.
Right. Women and men are seduced by different things,
women,
right?
it's words, and men, it's visuals. It's unfortunately, it's the obvious physical appearances of things. That's not to say that they can't be seduced by other qualities.
Sure. Well, and attractiveness is different than seduction, because usually for attractiveness, historically speaking, like I, need to put all the caveats, like every caveat that's politically correct, please place in here. But typically women list, money, property, and prestige as things that are important because it indicates, evolutionarily, it indicates an ability to be supported, and attractiveness indicates an ability to make children who will also make children. Like I'm a scientist. I can't help it.
That's true.
Yeah.
Scott Galloway talks about.
No, I think Jonathan sent me something that I think is really very misogynistic. Jonathan sent me talking is foreplay for women. And what I think is lying is how men get women to bed.
Talking doesn't necessarily mean lying.
Yeah.
Really? If your lips are moving. There's that song. Your lips are moving. Your lips are moving. No, but that's one of the earliest lessons I was ever taught by my parents, was that women will use sex to get love and men will use love to get sex. Men will say anything. They will say anything for the purpose of I deflated him again.
He's
He's going to be a shell of his former self.
I'm shriveling up just hearing all of this.
No, I hate that. And I don't know if my parents were right, but you know what? I'm 48. I could say that like 9.9 times out of 10, at least in those formative years, we're talking about in the years when you're learning to navigate junior high, high school, even your 20s, and I'd say this day and age, well into your 30s, I feel like it's still true. Ladies?
I'm going to throw my hat in and put a vote for that there is authentic connection that is possible, that there are many people who are good, who are trying to form connection, and who can use these skills and these tools, I should say, to increase their ability to make connection because they're doing things that they may not understand or off-putting. And if I frame it from that perspective, I might pass it back to you, Robert, and say, from a good place, I'm trying to make connections and I may not be sure what I'm doing. For example, I may be showing my anxiousness, which I don't realize I'm doing. Give us the bit of an overview. How does one become a great seducer from a good place?
Yeah. Well, to me, the word doesn't have negative connotations. I know it does for a lot of people, but I don't see it that way. So the word doesn't put a chill up my spine. It actually thrills me and excites me because I was not raised, but reading the great literature on seduction, the libertine fiction of the 19th century, etc. So to me, it's extremely exciting. One of the most important qualities is to have a lack of defensiveness and a lack of insecurity.
I'm taking notes.
So the typical rake is a man who loves women, who's addicted to women, has a lot of femininity in his spirit, actually, was probably raised by a mother that was kind of dominant. And so he's extremely into female psychology, but one woman can never satisfy him, right?
That's mommy issues.
See, you like to turn these things around. But maybe
it's a bad thing.
Yes, you are.
You have a binary like good or bad. You like something that's either good or bad. You don't like a gray area.
No, that's true. Okay, sorry. Go ahead. That's called a rake? I didn't know that term.
A rake is...
Because that's one of, I have my list of seducers.
A rake is a man who's obsessed with women, who really, and I've said it before, I was a rake in my 20s. Oh. So you can go ahead and hate me.
I mean, that should be the title of your next book. I was a rake in my 20s.
Yeah, well, they call them a reformed rake. So I'm a reformed rake. But you're kind of obsessed with women. You're very interested in them. A lot of men have no understanding of women. They're not interested in them. They're not interested in their psychology, in their world, how they think differently than a man. But rakes are. They're fascinated by it. They're fascinated by their psychology, by just the clothes they wear, by everything they do, their activity, their energy, etc. But they can never be satisfied by one woman. They have to have more and more and more. They need different ones constantly. But for that 1 month where they're interested in you, or 2 months, they are so keyed into you. They're so completely absorbed in you. They love you so much, to give you so much attention that is very hard for a woman to resist it. This is the kind of the Lord Byron or the Duke Ellington or the Errol Flynns of this world. But getting back to your question, the lack of insecurity. So a lot of men, for instance, they think that they're interacting with a woman, let's say in a bar. It could be a woman, but I'm a man, so it's easy for me to go from that perspective. Thinking,
a heterosexual man.
Yeah.
Just trying to be.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Am I saying the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? Does she like me? What am I doing that's not connecting her? What am I doing that's right? They're absorbed in their thinking. They're absorbed in themselves. And the other person, the woman or the man, can pick that up, can sense it. And it's kind of off-putting. They can sense that they're thinking about themselves in that moment. If you flip that around and you're not thinking about yourself, but you're absorbed in the other person, not to use them or manipulate them, but you're genuinely interested in them. You don't have that defensiveness, that insecurity. It's massively seductive Because think of it, how rarely that happens to you in life. How rarely does somebody talk to you and actually appears interested in what you have to say, is actually interested in your spirit, is actually interested in your ideas and where you come from in your childhood.
That's classical courtship. It's just, it doesn't really exist anymore.
It doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
Right. It is courtship, but it's a skill. It's an ability that you have to let go of yourself.
Well, not to argue for social conservatism, but when there used to be a lead up to sexual intimacy, there was an extended period of time, sometimes, just sometimes, not always, where there was a process of getting to know the other person and learning about them. But when sex is expected, or when both parties expect it as a first night of getting to know someone, there's really not a need in that sense, meaning it becomes more transactional. And, not to be, Marxist about it, it becomes a commodity. Like it really is. Like sex just becomes a commodity. And this component of intimacy really, is kind of gets sidelined.
Well, seduction depends on tension. It depends on resistance from the other person. So if the other person doesn't resist you, there's no kind of, you don't have to do anything. There's no effort. You're going to sleep with them tomorrow or they're going to leave you. But the fact that they're resisting you makes you go like, what can I do to change that?
But isn't that a manipulation?
So what's wrong with manipulation? If men didn't manipulate women and women didn't manipulate men, there would be no children in this world.
No, it doesn't feel so
Your
good,
parents
Robert.
wouldn't have had you, Mom.
I don't know why they had me.
I don't know why they had me is the line of the podcast.
There has to be some kind of manipulation involved.
I guess.
So if you don't manipulate, all that happens is I just wear the clothes that I wear. I say whatever I want to say, and the other person falls in love with me. We have sex. We have babies.
It's beyond that. There's an app that tells me how close someone is who'd like to have sex with anyone, and all I have to do is open that. I'm not saying me, but people. All I have to do is open that app, and we've
Nowadays
we've lily padded this whole thing.
We have lack of defensiveness. We have lack of insecurities, confidence.
Yeah.
What other qualities are essential?
The ability to get involved in the other person's spirit, which I've already talked about, is very important. And then seduction is a language basically without words. And so you have to master this language. It's a language of gestures, of you take someone to a certain place. There's no words involved, but by taking to this particular place, which may have romantic connotations or whatever, you're gesturing something to them. When you give a gift, there are seductive gifts and there are non-seductive gifts. A non-seductive gift is just spending a lot of money, $10,000 on a ring. Whereas if you spent $10 and you gave them something that reflected something they had said, something from their childhood, some story that they were relating to you, it reveals that you were listening to them, which is very seductive, right? So I tell people, if you're talking to someone for several hours, which nobody does anymore anyway, but let's say that's involved in your seduction, you're talking to them. If later in the conversation you come back to something they said hours ago and you kind of bring it up again in a different context, it's going to register that you were listening to them and you remembered it and it's under your skin and it's deeply seductive because you're listening to someone. People don't listen anymore. They don't reflect. They don't mirror you anymore. It's something we're all missing. That's why I don't find the word seduction evil at all. We're missing this so much in our pleasureless, completely political world where people aren't open to the spirits of other people. They're just so closed off. So you're listening. So that's a gesture. It's not the words that you say, but the fact that you remembered what they said, right? It's how you smell. It's how you look. I mean, don't get me too literal there. But it's a physical communication as well. It's the theater that you create. So you don't show up every night wearing your shorts and your T-shirt. You wear something that shows that you're actually,
not depressed.
Yeah.
Not depressed.
Yeah.
She's teasing me because I wear the same type of t-shirt all the time.
No,
I have a gray
I was
t-shirt.
teasing myself.
Oh, you were teasing
Yeah, I was
yourself.
teasing
Yeah,
myself.
but that's because you're here. You're not seducing here.
Right.
I hope. So
What they say, foreplay is everything from the last orgasm to the next one. Sorry.
So I mean, those are the main things: lack of insecurity, confidence in yourself, entering the other person's spirit, and kind of understanding this nonverbal language. You don't have to say "I love you," but you show that you love the other person. You don't have to say a word, but you show it to them by the things that you do for them.
Well, especially this last part about the language without words and the listening and the mirroring someone.
Yeah.
That's why I don't think it falls under manipulation. It falls under showing up, being present,
Yeah,
and you are going to find a match.
yeah,
If, again, coming from a good intention, it's people have a natural instinct to be on guard to say, is this person going to cause me harm?
Yeah, right.
And if the manipulation, as we're calling it, which again, I don't think it is manipulation, but I'm addressing the words you're using, Mayim. If the manipulation is to put you at ease to say, I'm not going to harm you because I actually am listening, well, the listening isn't a foil. It's actually the person is showing up and doing the work of what it takes to bond and be in connection with one another. And so what you're saying is, hey, you've forgotten, society, how to connect. Because of these digital tools, because we are no longer required to do so, because there are alternatives, because for all the reasons we know.
Yeah.
And you should remember, society, that these are the things that are required. And yes, they can be used for nefarious
They can be.
tactics.
Well, yeah, and I think a clarification might be helpful here, which I think you absolutely, can make. And I think there's a little bit, of an obligation here that we should make. The notion that if someone, let's say, doesn't want to go to bed with you, right? That needs to be respected, right? If someone does not want to, right? I mean, I think that's pretty clear. But what you're talking about, if I'm understanding, is we're talking about threading the needle in terms of the way that human primates interact. And there's a verbal and a nonverbal interplay that is largely missing because of a lot of interesting, features in our culture. And honestly, it's in our lifetime.
Yeah.
One of the skills that I was taught was most attractive to females when my parents were growing up was if a guy was a good dancer. And I think it's interesting because what it communicated was a physical kind of interplay, in some cases a playfulness, in some cases a romance. It was artistic, right? It was an understanding of music and movement. Right. There's an element of sort of peacocking. But when I think about, what dances were like when I was in junior high, which was totally, I think the last phase of when people would actually sway and things like that. But I'm thinking about, sort of the romance of courtship is where I think some of this lies. But I just want to be really careful that we're not talking about seduction being, a tool for convincing someone to do something that they don't want to do, right? No means no.
Well, a lot of men...
I'm not into you is I'm not into you.
A lot of men have a really hard time now dealing with rejection, right? And so what I tell them, because they've come to me for advice and I've talked to groups of men for this very purpose, is rejection is a good thing. It's fine. You just move on to the next person. If somebody says no, sometimes people say no, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're completely not into you. You're not going to force them to have sex, but you can still try and charm them in some way. But if it's very clear that they don't want anything to do with you, that you're even frightening them, fine.
Right.
Don't take it personally. Move on to the next person and keep. But I think a lot of men can't handle that kind of rejection. They want everything to be easy. They want every woman to sleep with them.
Well, and my fear is that then you're dealing with and I'm not saying you're doing this, but I'm saying what we see a lot is men then adopting a persona that is false, that they are sensitive, caring, or interested, so that they, don't have to deal with rejection because they're getting, in theory, what.
Well,
do I sound like a horrible person? I'm so cynical about it?
But women can see through that. They should be able to. No?
Sometimes, yeah. Well,
back in the day, they could see through it.
So, yes, and I think that this is where, when we talk about power, I'm interested in power differentials, and I'm interested in sort of places where women are not conditioned, to be able to, have a lot of agency, which can breed situations where it is hard to distinguish. Like if you're taught to always smile and say you're okay when you're not, that obviously translates into much larger issues of what happens in the dating arena, right?
Right.
You're taught to never, don't make him feel bad. Like if he went through all that trouble, if he bought you that expensive dinner, like that's, I think, still a factor for a lot of women.
Really?
Yeah.
That's sad.
It is sad.
I mean, a lot of women have written to me from the Art of Seduction, some complaining, and I feel bad. Mostly they say, your book really helped me see through this really evil guy who was trying to manipulate me. I saw that he was using some of your tactics. I saw through him.
Wow.
And it helped me. I'm fine with that because a lot of it is just opening up the game and showing you how people operate in this world. And I think there are there are obviously malevolent seducers out there, probably more men than women, but there are women who use it for nefarious purposes as well.
Yeah.
So,
we've been taught by men.
huh?
Nothing.
Quick list, Robert. What are the anti-seducer qualities that quickly make people uninterested?
Well, I call it the moralizer. So seduction is not a realm of morality, right? Okay? It's an arena of playfulness. It's theater, okay? And you're enjoying yourself. It's a realm of pure pleasure. And if you're always judging the other person, oh, you said that? You believe that? Oh, I can't believe it. Or you're wearing those clothes? That's incredible turnoff, right? So the moralizer. Drop all of that. Drop all your judgments and be completely open to the other person. There's none of that involved in here. There's no good or bad. Okay. The second thing is generosity, not being generous. So not paying when it could be man or woman, but being very niggly and cheap with your money, with your gifts, etc., and being ungenerous with your attention and your time. But being generous with your time and your attention, your money, is very, very seductive. Okay. I call this the bumbler. There's somebody who's always thinking about themselves and did I say the right thing? Did I do the right thing?
That's self-centered neurosis.
Yeah. That's very anti-seductive. This might not be true anymore when I wrote the book, but I had the character of the vulgarian who's very vulgar and
everyone's vulgar now, Robert.
I know.
How do you pick? How do you choose?
Yeah. Also, people who talk too much. This is something that men will have more than women, the mansplaining kind of thing, where they know so much about everything. They know about cars, stereos, wines. They can tell you exactly what you're doing wrong, etc. Talking too much and thinking that you know everything is very, very anti-seductive. These are a few of the qualities. I know there are like 5 more, but I don't want to bore the hell out of you. But you get the general idea.
It's very interesting.
That's very helpful. How did you reform yourself from your 20s as a rake?
Well, it gets tiring and it also gets a little bit pathetic. Warren Beatty maybe be able to get away with it, but when you're like in your 40s and your 50s and you're still like a rake and you still have that mentality, I think it feels kind of pathetic. It feels kind of like, and it's also sad because you're going to be lonely. When you're in your 20s, you're having a lot of fun. You're not worried about loneliness because there's so many different women you're involved with. But eventually you maybe either want a family or you want to settle down and you don't want to have this kind of chaos in your life. And you're facing a life where you're going to be alone a lot. So facing those kind of factors, thinking this is kind of pathetic a little bit and it's tiring. And I had my moment. I whatever the expression is, I made hay when the sun was shining. Part of the expression. It's over, all right? I'm getting older. It's not such a bad thing to get older. And I found a woman that I've been with now for a while, and she basically reformed me. She put the collar around my neck, and she tamed and domesticated me.
Was it an easy transition? I've heard, some people who have lived a certain way and then transitioning to that other way, when you start to become more close with someone, when there's an increase in vulnerability, it becomes challenging, and it could be easy to be, oh, wait a second, that other life was maybe a little bit lonely, but a lot of fun and exciting, and I didn't have all these emotional challenges that I'm having now.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. And you're always lured back into being a rake again, unfortunately, because you do have very pleasant memories, et cetera. So it is a challenge. You have to work on yourself, and you have to grow, and you have to mature a little bit and understand that if you're fooling around, that you're not going to have that relationship that you want, that you think is very important, you need it very much so. So the woman I'm with, we have a very deep connection intellectually and emotionally. And, we kind of help each other very deeply in each other's work, et cetera. So we're invested very deeply into it. So, you weigh that factor and you go, that's much more important than those momentary pleasures I had in my 20s. Now, not all men are going to feel that way, but that's my particular journey.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And the involvement in each other's work and helping each other in that way, and the intellectual connection, I think, is something to look for in partnership.
I have a question, and I know it's not necessarily fair to make you sort of comment on current, dating practices, because, none of us are really in that current pool. But I do think in the framework of what we're talking about, of seduction and power, and, sort of that interplay, many people are having, non-monogamous relationships. They're polyamorous, right? And I'm fascinated by this just because I think it's very interesting. And what I hear, from a lot of women is like, two can play at that game, and if he wants to have lots of partners, like I should too, and I'm a sexual person, and so is he, and all these things. But I wonder if you could speak a little bit to where that kind of comes into this notion of, is that a reaction to men being rakes? Is it, is this something that women experience in the same way? And, at what point is there a neurotic or compulsive feature to the need to have multiple partners? Does that come into any sort of understanding of power or seduction that you can understand?
Well, everybody is different. Some people, I think maybe it is a healthy thing where they just have an incredibly powerful sexual drive,
Mm-hmm.
and they want different partners, and they found somebody. So I don't like to judge with broad strokes like that.
And sometimes it's not just the sexual connection. It's like having committed, intimate relationships with more than one person. So.
Yeah. But then there's the sex addiction part of it that becomes compulsive, where you're dealing with issues probably stemming from your childhood, probably stemming from your connection to your mother.
Mm-hmm.
I know you probably heard of Neil Strauss, wrote The Game. He wrote this book where he tried to get out of the game, where he called The Truth.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of this?
Yeah.
Where he tried to reform his ways as a pickup artist. And he went to these retreats in Arizona, and they taught him all these things about who he was and why he has this compulsive need, et cetera. And he essentially reformed himself. So I think he did. I can't say for sure. But it came from an unhealthy place.
But you have to have self-awareness also to be able to access this kind of information, right?
Well, I think in his case, he was getting...
I'm saying in general, not...
Yeah. But
Sounds like he went through a rigorous process.
He did. He wanted to have children. He wanted to have a family. And he thought this, I don't want to be someone's, constantly sleeping around and trying to also have a family. I don't know. I'm not going to go into how he thought. But as far as women, I do believe that men and women are different. I'm sorry to say that.
It's a very radical notion.
I know it is. And I think women think differently about sex than men do.
Generally speaking,
they have more at stake, obviously.
Yeah. Well, one egg a month,
Yeah. So the women that are involved in polyamorous relationships, I don't think it's the same as it is for a man. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't women that are naturally drawn to that kind of lifestyle, and I'm sure there are. But I don't think it's the same drive and the same, I don't think it's as prevalent as it is for men. Excuse me for saying that. I know I'm being a quote unquote radical gender essentialist here, but I do believe that it is different between men and women,
Mhm.
biologically speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about mastery.
Yes. Mastery of seduction and power.
Well,
No, I'm kidding.
they do interrelate. They do interrelate because you talk about people finding their life's purpose or finding their life's task. And in order to do that, you are able to have more agency and influence on your life potentially. But can you start us off, explain a little bit about the notion of finding a life's task to someone who may be like, well, I don't know if I have one.
Well, everybody has one. And of all of the chapters in all of my books, it's the most important one of all for fulfilling your life, for having what you want in this world. It's extremely important. And I believe I'm a complete egalitarian in that sense. I believe everybody is born with this capacity. Everybody is born with a life's task. And in the book, I kind of reduce it to genetics. The DNA that you possess has never been replicated in the past nor in the future. It is one of a kind. It is a mix of hormones, of chemicals that are completely unique. You are a unique phenomenon in the history of the universe. And it's something that may sound like a cliche, but if you think about it, it's very, very powerful. There has never been anybody like you. And you can add on top of that your parents, who also have their own uniqueness. They're raising you in a unique way with a chemistry that has never existed before. And you can also say that about your earliest experiences in life, the people that you interacted with. So you are a unique phenomenon in this world. And that uniqueness, what makes you different, is your life's task. Understanding what makes you different from everybody else clearly will indicate to you the career path that you should be following, should indicate what it is you should be studying in high school and college, and when you enter the work world. And it's, for a lot of people, I believe for every child, it's very clear, but you don't remember it, right? So when you're like 2 or 3 years old, you're attracted to things, I call them primal inclinations. Abraham Maslow, the great psychologist, he called them impulse voices. You have these impulse voices that say, I like this fruit, I don't like that. I like this person, I don't like that person. You have these definitive tastes early on in your life. And a man named Howard Gardner wrote a book called The 5 Frames of Intelligence that I tell people that is very essential. That we associate intelligence with just intellectual power, but that's not true. There's intelligence in the body, kinetic intelligence. There's intelligence, a social intelligence has to do with dealing with people. There's an intelligence that was with words and language. There's intelligence with patterns, which has to do with like math and music. There's kind of visual intelligence. And you have one of these, right?
Just like from doing nothing, just from being born.
Yes,
like you
genetically.
got one of them, right?
Genetically.
Sometimes
Okay.
two.
Well, usually it's one, but
Okay.
there can be a second one that you could combine that
Mhm.
with. So we could look at a great person like Da Vinci,
gonna say
and
Da
he
Vinci,
has
yeah.
he's like visually oriented,
Yeah.
very much so. But he also had that mathematical kind of brain, and he also had that visual intelligence of being able to design mechanical things. Mechanical intelligence was the other one I was thinking of. So you have that. You have that. It's almost we put too many words and labels on it. It's something that's deeply ingrained in you. It's actually a chapter I'm writing about in my new book, and I'm going back to the ancient Greek concept of the daemon, that you're born with a kind of a guardian spirit and a fate that you are trying to follow, and you have to key into what it is that separated you at birth. All right. So you have this, but what happens is you get 5 years old, your parents are saying, oh, you should be studying this. You don't want to go into dance. You want to start playing a musical instrument. Your teacher starts saying you need to be studying, you need to get better at geometry, even though you can't figure out anything about math. Your friends start telling you things. Those impulse voices that you were hearing when you were 3 or 4 get drowned out by your parents, by your teachers, by your peers. You don't hear it anymore. You're 18 years old, 19, you're confused. You enter the work world, you haven't a clue anymore what it is that you actually love. Your parents say, go to law school so that you can make some money. You go to law school. You're like 29, you're 30, and you go, God, I don't really love this. I'm burning out, and you start taking drugs. You start getting into some bad habits because you're not connected to it. You don't love it, right? So it's something that everybody has. And I used in Mastery the example of Temple Grandin, a woman born with deep, deep autism, non-functional autism. At the age of 2, her parents were to commit her to a hospital where she'd spend the rest of her life, right? But she met a woman, a teacher, who thought she could teach this deeply autistic child language. And slowly she brought her out of her shell. And she realized she had a fascination, like a lot of autistic people do, with animals, right? She had this deep connection, almost she could understand their language.
I mean, she revolutionized the way we think of slaughter and, and animals. I'm a vegan person, so we know about her.
Okay.
She revolutionized the way that we understand, essentially food production.
Yeah.
Because of her understanding of animal, psychology.
Well, she had a connection to cows
Mm-hmm.
that was just insane. She just understood them deeply at a very early age. So I say, if someone born with high level autism can find their way to a life's task, I'm not saying it's easier, that's for everyone, but it shows that everybody has this potential. So I'm 100% egalitarian in the belief that everybody, even from the worst background, has this potential. But it's a lot harder for some people to realize, I understand. But you have it. And I counsel a lot of people who say, I don't have any idea what that is. Help me, Robert, I'm completely lost. You have to go through a process that I try and lead them through. So I don't have as much time as I used to have to do this kind of thing, but it is a process. It's a process of connecting to who you were in your earliest years, to those impulse voices, to what excites you, to what doesn't excite you. And I believe if I had the time, I could do that for everybody that came to me for this. I've had a lot of success in doing it, but I understand why it's not easy. I always felt attracted to words and language in an obsessive way, almost an unhealthy way. I just loved word games, right? And I loved history, and prehistory was my obsession. So, I knew it from an early age, so it's easier for me to say that. But I understand a lot of people don't have that for various reasons. And there might be a component to people who understand it deeply and don't lose that connection. There might be a reason why some people have that, like an Einstein, like a Steve Jobs, like a Martha Graham, people that I highlight in the book. There might be a reason why some people hold on to it better than others, that is genetic or whatever, I don't know. But I believe everybody can find their way back to it if we go through this process.
Mayim, what did you like as a kid?
Telling other people what to do.
Ah.
I remember being 3 years old and the girls wouldn't play with me because I was too bossy. And, when I think about sort of like, I wanted to be a psychiatrist. I wanted to be a doctor. And then when I got to college, I wanted to be a psychiatrist and I didn't have the grades for med school. But yeah, I've always been interested in like therapy, talking to people, helping people, and I'm thinking like, gosh, was that related? As a 3-year-old, that's sort of managing and directing and being like, I want to play this way. I don't know.
It was 2 years ago, I think, Mayim directed her first movie that she wrote.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't there on set, but when I was talking with her, she expressed feeling more at home and in herself on a set, which requires telling people what to do.
But being a director, meaning being in charge of every aspect of, meaning like the visual, I wrote it, so the words, like it was the best way of being bossy without it being an authoritarian.
I have to see this. What is the movie called?
It's called As They Made Us.
As They Made Us.
As They Made Us. It's with Dustin Hoffman and Candice Bergen.
Really? Oh, fantastic. Oh, I have to look it up.
Had some big hitters there. And Simon Helberg from The Big Bang Theory and Diana Agron. And it's, it's like a character kind of study, but a very, very small film. But it absolutely felt like this is why my brain was made the way
Yeah,
it was, because
sure.
I could see in angles, and like I, loved the cinematographer and being
Yeah,
able
yeah.
to work with him. And that was my favorite thing, was designing all these things. And I was like, is this what my brain, was kind of designed to
Also,
do?
therapist, as well
Yep.
as telling people what to do, as
Yep.
well as artist, as well as
Yeah.
visual. Kind of put all the pieces
look,
together.
I think for a lot of women, I think of my mom's generation. I think of women probably for most of his history. The proscenium was pretty limited. And you were raised, to have a certain set of skills that serve. I'm watching 1883, and I'm like, that was what women's lives were. Like cooking, cleaning, making sure no one died, and having enough children so that when some died, you still had leftover, right? And so I think, like, gosh, what a blessed time for me to get to live in, where I got to go to college. It wasn't this novel thing. It wasn't
Right.
crazy that I wanted to get an education, or that I didn't feel the need to get married at 16 or 17.
Yeah.
And for people trying to find their life's task now or their life's purpose now, you've described connecting with what they used to like as children, re-identifying it, reconnecting with that. You also talk about sort of viscerally in the body,
Yeah.
understanding what those signals are.
Well, the signals are things that you love and things that you hate.
Hmm.
So, going on my own life, as I said, I've had this visceral attraction to this day. Whenever I see something in the New York Times that has to do with our earliest ancestors, with things about the Neanderthals,
Mm.
I get this thrill that I just got to read it, because I'm so fascinated with this notion of who we were 50,000 years ago compared to now, right? Something from when I was 4 years old,
Mm.
but also things I hated. I hated working for other people. I hated office politics. I hated the bullshit going on. I hated all the game playing. I hated all the brown nosing. I hated it. I realized I never held a job in my entire life for more than 11 months,
Mm.
right? That's why I had 50, 60 different jobs. So now
Is
I
it
don't
that
work for
right.
anybody else, and I'm in heaven.
Is it that
I've died and I'm in
simple?
heaven. What?
Is it that simple? Like, what are the things that you viscerally like? What are the things that you
Well,
viscerally
it's not
hate? Like,
that simple.
no,
That's
but I'm saying, is
yeah.
that a starting place? Because, I was just
Yeah.
talking with my 18-year-old, and I was like, isn't it interesting that you're entering a phase of your life where you could, and he is a person who has really, both sides of his brain, running on a lot of cylinders. Like, he could say, I'm going to study science and I'm going to go to medical school, and like that could be your life. Or you could study philosophy and say, I'm going to write and I'm going to think. And like, we're at these points a lot of times in our life where, options are open. Like, is it that kind of simple? I mean, mostly I went to school with people who thought they had to go to med school,
Right.
because it's all that they were and in a culture that worships money and power, that is what drives a lot of people. But I really love this idea. And I think for those of us who are artists, like, you play. We live in a play world. Like, as an actor, I literally like pretend for a living, which is a bizarre thing, to do. But that's sort of some of what, artists are able to tap into, right? Like, I get to keep playing and seeing what moves me.
Exactly. So, you have to make a living. You have to be somewhat practical.
Well, Scott Galloway, who we had on, says, don't pursue your passion. That's not going to be, what actually makes you successful and able to support yourself. Find the thing that you're best at, that you can do, even if it doesn't move you. And like, that felt very loveless to me.
I'm of the opposite perspective.
I know.
So
That's why you're here for longer than he is.
Okay.
Because he made me cry.
Okay. Well, so you do have to make a living. You have to be practical. I understand that. But what you want to do is you want to think of your 20s as a period of adventure, as a period of trying things out. You don't want to have this kind of monorail, linear perspective. I've got to go to law school. I've got to make $100,000 by this, blah, 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 blah. You're not going to have any fun. You're going to burn yourself out and you're going to end up miserable.
But that used to be when women had to have your babies.
Yeah.
Now they're extending it. But many of us are geared towards like, I got to have a baby when I'm most fertile.
That's now in your 30s.
Well, I mean, I was just more conservative. I was I
A
wanted
lot of women waiting until their 30s these days.
I know, but then you're geriatric after 35. Like they flag you. It's like you can't do a home
No.
birth. Yeah. After 35 is considered a geriatric pregnancy. Eggs have been in there a long time.
It's changing. It's changing.
Well,
I have a lot of female friends who've had children in their late 30s.
For sure.
Whitney Cummings, she's in her 40s.
But also, like, she talked about it. Like, the journey is not necessarily linear or smooth. It often involves,
okay, but
a lot of.
so
Okay,
what?
but go
She
ahead.
had her career.
Okay,
Look where
she had a
she's
great
at.
time. You're right. But she
Okay.
also, but people, and Whitney talked about this, she also was in a place where she had the, financial and cultural support to do that, for a
Right.
lot of women. Like, I mean, look, you can't even have access to birth control or abortions, but we don't need to talk about that. But go ahead. 20s adventure. Good
Well,
times.
I mean, even for a woman, like you're in your early 20s,
Yeah.
you can,
Yes.
and then by the time that you've kind of
Yes.
got skills and you're
Yeah.
ready to do something, you could have a child when you're 29,
Then they
28.
penalize you for leaving to have the baby. Sorry.
This is what she was talking
I
about
had
earlier
my
with
kids in
Law
breast.
10.
I had my kids in. That's right. Law 10 is coming. Robert's like, I changed my mind. You are toxic. You have infected
I haven't
the whole room
I haven't-
and your entire field of neuroscience.
I haven't quite gotten there yet. Maybe eventually.
Another
Give me
10 minutes.
Another 10 minutes. Well,
I'll be quiet.
like my wife, she's a film director,
Yes.
right? So she knows about what you're talking
Yeah.
about the kind of
Yeah.
the chaos and all
Yeah.
the people. She knew that early on she wanted a career.
Right.
She wasn't a baby-oriented woman.
Right.
And so we opted not to have children.
Right. Which is a choice for some people.
And a lot of people do it. And in this world with climate change and with,
everything.
there's a good logic behind that sometimes.
Right.
So women can always make that choice unless they feel very deprived by that
Right.
because they are a
Well,
baby-oriented
the
person.
pressure to be part of the baby making, machine, it's enormous pressure.
Yeah, but I'm trying to tell you.
Have you seen those
you're not-
commercials? They look so
you're not supposed to.
happy.
You're not supposed to be giving into pressure.
100%.
You're supposed to be figuring out what you want. And if you are a social person, if
Right.
babies are a deep need for you and it can be an
Right.
incredibly wonderful experience, then do it. But to be someone who wants to have a career
Right.
but feels the pressure and has a kid and is not very
Right.
good mother or father,
Right.
it's terrible.
It's very terrible.
So women should have that choice and there should be no
Right.
pressure.
Right.
All right? Anyway.
20s, excitement, adventure,
Yeah.
exploring.
But you have a reasonable idea of what excites you.
Mm-hmm.
And so you try different things.
Mm.
But there's a kind of a logic to it. There's sort of a parameter. It's not like you're studying philosophy and you're studying, carpentry or shoemaking. I don't know. I can't think of what the other thing would
Yeah.
be. But there's a logic to it. There's a connection to it. But you're having fun. You're trying things out. You're not so worried about making money,
Mm.
right? I'm not being Scott Galloway here. The money will come if you figure out what you love. And so the human brain doesn't learn very well if it's not emotionally involved.
Mm.
You tune out, you burn out. You're
Yeah.
not listening. You're not studying. You're not absorbing, right? And you can bullshit your way through that when you're in your 20s and your mind is flexible and open. You go to law school, you can learn it. But by the time you're 30, it starts boring the hell out of you.
Mm.
And you're not learning and you're not
Right.
developing, you're not evolving, you're heading towards a disaster. So you want to feed your mind, you want to have adventures within a certain framework. And then when you're 29, you're 30, you've got skills, things start to fit. You start to say, this is where I can go. I can mix acting with neuroscience.
Mhm.
I can become a film director and a podcaster.
Mhm.
I can combine these different things that I love. And you start finding it out. And you've got these skills and you become creative instead of just absorbing information. And so nothing will happen positive in your life if you don't have that. I really honestly believe it. And a lot of people are disoriented and lost in their lives because they don't have a clue. They don't have any idea about this. And it's tragic. And they enter their 30s and 40s. By the time you're in your 40s, it starts to get a little too late in some ways. I think in your 30s, you can I wasn't 38 until I wrote the 48 Laws
It's
of Power.
unbelievable.
So,
There's something really interesting about your trajectory being 38 when you wrote the book.
Yeah.
You'd call yourself maybe a late bloomer in terms of finding that,
a very late bloomer.
which I appreciate because it also relates to something that you speak about, which is the notion of anxiety as a motivator and, your relationship with anxiety when things were not working for you.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what you were going through when it wasn't working and actually how that helped you, realize where you should go next? And it was somewhat divined that you found a path towards a book?
Well, it's weird. Life is strange. In the moment that you're doing things, you're not really aware of a pattern. You're not really aware of a fate or a destiny or any larger thing. And then in retrospect, you start seeing this. So who's to say that it's all illusion, it's all in your mind? But I don't believe so. I believe that I can discern a pattern looking back that actually was there. And so a lot of it was I tried these different jobs out and it doesn't fit me. The fit isn't right. So I started off in New York as a journalist. I lived in New York for several years. And because I thought I could make a living and write. And I didn't like it. I didn't like the fact that I wrote something and it only was seen for a couple weeks. Whereas I'm somebody who loves history and I like things that last for hundreds of years, not a week, not 2 weeks. I thought it was it depressed me. The world of journalism and the people in it depressed me. And this one editor took me aside when I was maybe about 24 or so, 25. And he was on his third martini and he said, Robert, you're never going to be a writer. You don't have the discipline. You don't have the skill. You're all over the place. You just go to law school, go to business school. You're not going to make it.
That's terrible.
Yeah. And I was seeing that he was kind of drinking martinis and I understood that he was not necessarily the most reliable source of wisdom there. But it hurt me. But then I realized this is not the right world for me. So then I was young and adventurous. I just packed up and went to Europe. I wandered around Europe.
Are these your rakish years?
My rakish years. I tried all these different jobs. I was going to be a novelist. I was going to be the next Hemingway or whatever. I was going to try all these different jobs. And I did. And I had a great time, but I never wrote a novel because I didn't have the discipline and I wasn't probably very good at it. And so I realized that I'm getting 30 years old. I'm living in Spain and I'm teaching English, but it's not my path. I'm worried. I have that anxiety that you mentioned. So I decided my dad had just come down with cancer. I was going to come back to LA. I was going to get into the film business in Hollywood. I can write screenplays. That's what I'm meant to do. And, I can make a living, make a good living. Hell, I do that and I come back and I'm in it for like 7-8 years and I get this icky feeling. It's not me. It doesn't fit. So I kept having this recurring feeling. It's not me. It doesn't fit. But then the point might be you reach a point where you go, maybe nothing fits. Maybe you're just a restless person that can't figure it out, So you start to worry a little bit. Okay, but then, so this, we're complicated creatures. So part of me, my brain is going, maybe you're never going to figure out, the depressing part, the part that does get depressed. And I was very deeply depressed. But there's also another voice saying, don't give up, don't give up. There's still something there. There's still, something. You have great knowledge of languages, of literature, of philosophy, of history. There's still a niche for you, even in this weird world. Then I'm in Italy and I meet a man. They're on one of my 60 different jobs. We're trying to launch a new media school in Italy. And it's a disaster. And it's just all this Machiavellian politicking. And he's a Dutchman and he's a book packager. And he asked me, do I have any ideas for a book? And we were in Venice, Italy. We're walking along near the Piazza San Marco. And I improvised what turns into the 48 Laws of Power. And his eyes light up. And it's like a revelatory moment for me. I could write books, nonfiction books that combined philosophy, history, literature, psychology. I never intended to write self-help books or books for business people.
Or books that would be banned in prisons because they're too powerful.
Yeah, exactly. I was a literary person, a philosophy person, right? Those are my references. But, he believed in me. It was like a fortunate, but sometimes people say that you kind of draw that kind of thing to you. If he had come to me when I was 25, I wouldn't have been able to write the book. I was at the right moment. Fate intervened, and it feels like it was meant to happen. I know that's ridiculous. I know that's woo-woo, but I still really, really believe it. And I was so desperate and even slightly suicidal at that point that this was my chance. And I grabbed it and I gave it everything I had, all the experiences, all the bad times, all the manipulations that people have played on me. I thank them in the acknowledgments of the 48 Laws of Power, all the people who've done these nasty things to me. You inspired this book. Thank you very much. I had all this information to draw upon. And so, at 38, it turned my life around. I don't know what would have happened to me if I hadn't had that occurrence.
I want to touch on the woo-woo part because
Yeah, I was going to say, this is like the most spiritual experience without you mentioning sort of like a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
I'm listening to The Alchemist, the book The Alchemist, with my son. He's 16, and he really loves sci-fi and magic. And I've been trying to get him to have a little bit more exposure to literary books or sort of books that are on the lists of books you should read in high school. So and he loves audio, so we've been listening to it in the car, and it talks a lot about the world is going to conspire on your behalf to help you find the thing that you're meant to do in the world, your unique gift. And so as you're talking, it's like you hit the crisis of faith there, being depressed, but that little voice. Where do you think that little voice came from? Do you think it was divine intervention or a spiritual world realm? I know you've talked about meditating. Like, do you have a connection to things greater than ourselves?
Yes, I do. And it's the subject of my next book. I'm writing a book on the sublime. And I had a near-death experience, with my stroke. I came this close to dying. I wouldn't be here. I almost had irreparable brain damage. I still have moments. And I'm writing right now a story. I have a chapter on what I call the daemon that I'm writing right now. And I talk in this book, each chapter has a kind of a main figure. And the main figure for this chapter, believe it or not, is Harriet Tubman. And she, as I analyzed it as a young girl, had a definite, really strong, strange, unusual spirit, born into slavery. But she was a rebellious, restless, a fighting spirit in her, right? But with slavery, you can't imagine the limitations are insane, right? But she kept finding her way. She kept struggling. And she did all these things that eventually led to her getting to work in the fields, which was a great liberation, where she learned about the railroad network, where she learned all about Black culture, underground culture. It opened her eyes up. She was kind of maneuvering her life in unconscious ways. And then she had that brain injury where someone threw a lead weight at somebody else that hit her here in the head. And from then on, she was hearing voices.
She had visions, yeah.
And she heard the voice of the God saying, Harriet, I want you to escape to the north. Harriet, I want you to do this, that,
take
and the
my
other.
people out of slavery. I mean, that was the...
And so the way I'm trying to analyze it, because the information we have from her life is very scanty, and some of it's pure legend, some of it we don't know. But I'm saying that she had that voice when she was 2 years old. It was there, it was very strong. And it was kind of like underneath everything. Underneath. So she has to go work in these houses for these white mistresses, fluffing up their pillows and looking after the newborns. But that spirit is still there underneath it and saying, I've got to rebel. I hate these people. I hate this world. She figures a way to trick them, deceive them, gets her sent out to work in the fields. That spirit is there. It's constantly moving. And then that accident happens. And I'm trying to say that the voice that she's hearing of the Lord, I'm not to say that it could have been the Lord, who knows? But I'm saying it's that uniqueness that she had when she was 2 or 3 years old, now raised to the 10th level. She's hearing it, right? So there's an element where that voice is in you, right? It's always there. It is always there inside of you. Was it planted by the Creator? I'm not a religious person by nature. Okay, so I don't necessarily believe that, but I have nothing against it. I'm extremely agnostic. If I die and there's heaven, I'm a believer. I'm open to anything. Okay, but I believe that it's something in you is planted at your birth. A seed is planted, and that is what your voice is. And that voice communicates not just with words, it communicates with your heartbeat, with your skin, with how you feel about it, how you react to certain things, what repulses you, what excites you, what thrills you, right? It's visceral. And you feel that voice and it communicates to you. So even in my darkest moments, it wasn't like I was hearing a voice saying, Robert, you're really good. I was just not giving up. A part of me just wouldn't give up. So you can almost say that it was a voice telling me not to give up, that I felt like I was destined for something. I always felt since a very early age, I was destined for something strange and unusual. I thought I'd be a novelist. That didn't happen. But it turned out in a different direction, So it was always there. Thank God it was always there because I was on the point of giving up.
It's very powerful. You mentioned you're agnostic. A lot of people have spiritual experiences. We actually had a woman on who had a near-death experience who explained meeting God, going to the other side, having a download of universal information that exists in many literary texts that she had never read and came back with supernatural ability.
Yeah.
Did you have, what was your near-death experience like?
Well, nothing like that. I mean, I had like a slight kind of weird vision. Something, I had a stroke where I was driving, and my wife, girlfriend at the time, was sitting next to me, and she forced me to pull over. And then strange things are going on in my mind, and it's starting to close down, but I'm not aware of it, and I'm talking, et cetera, as if everything is normal. And then I completely blank out, right? And then I wake up, and I'm in a hospital, and I don't know what happened. But as I'm waking up, I have this kind of vision of my mother and my wife talking to me at my funeral. And I'm kind of seeing them, and they're saying, and I'm getting a feeling, I can't hear what they're saying, but I'm getting the feeling that everything is all right. Life has gone on, right? Now, I don't believe that this is something from heaven or God, because as I said, I'm agnostic. There's a really great book that I love called Dying to Live. It's Susan Blackmore, I think. She's a neuroscientist. It's a great book. And you find it fascinating because she explains everything in very clear sight, but she's not condescending about it. She's not saying you woo-woo people are ridiculous.
Right.
She's understanding on a very deep level, and she relates it a lot because she, like myself, practices Zen Buddhism, so she relates it to certain things going on in the brain. When everything kind of shuts down, and you're actually in connection to reality, whereas we're not normally in connection to it. Also, Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, you know about her? Oh, she'd be good for your show, for your podcast.
I mean, it's kind of our sweet spot. We love
wrote a
this stuff.
book, Stroke of Insight.
Oh, yeah.
She had a horrific stroke.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My mom loved that one.
And she explains it. She's a neuroscientist, and she explains it of what happens to the brain.
Right. We gave a talk at South by Southwest about the intersection of science and spirituality, and trying to explain some of the neurological substrates of prayer, of meditation, and a lot of these studies are done, with practicing meditators, such as yourself, but also the notion of, what are the commonalities, and there's this overlap between DMT and between near-death experiences. It's kind of a window into, what is this thing that, I think in our culture we associate with like it must be God, but anyway. It's very exciting to have you here for the 25th anniversary of the Laws of Power. I really appreciate my very special copy.
Okay.
And it's just really been, I mean, it's been a thrill to talk to you. I feel like we could
same
talk
here.
to you forever. Thank you so much. It's
You're
really
very
been so much fun
welcome,
talking
I've
to
really
you. I'm
enjoyed
not
it.
scared of you anymore.
You sure?
Yes.
You're just a little
Now
bit.
you're scared of me.
A little bit, yeah.
She has that effect on people.
From our breakdown to the one we hope you never have. We'll see you next time.
It's Mayim Bialik's breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you. She's got a neuroscience PhD or two. One fiction, one and now she's gonna break down. It's a breakdown. She's gonna break it down.
Has it been wildly surreal to start to meet people like Drake and 50 Cent and go from writing into that world?
Well, it's even more surreal than that. I compare it to, there was a ride at Disneyland, I don't know if it's still there, called Mr. Toad's
course.
Wild Ride.
Yes.
It's sort of like that. Because before I wrote the 48 Laws, I was kind of this guy in his late 30s, sort of a loser. At least my parents were getting worried about me. I had like my girlfriend and now my wife, I had like 50, 60 different jobs up until then, doing writing, but just everything. I worked at a detective agency. You can't imagine the different jobs I had. But I had no success. And although I'm still the same person that I was back then, nobody was caring about my advice. Nobody listened to me. Who's this loser trying to tell me how to get my life together? Suddenly the 48 Laws of Power come, and people are like starting to consult me and stuff. So, but the really weirdest part was like 6 months after it came out, it got translated into Italian. And they brought me over for this like book tour, my first book tour. And it was like in the island of Capri. And it was all these celebrities and paparazzi were following me around and taking pictures of me. And I met the ex-president of Italy. And I was like, what the hell's going on? This isn't right. I felt like an imposter, basically. And then, then the rapper stuff started happening. But by then, I was getting a little used to, some of the attention.
You got used to all the rappers being in love with you.
Yeah. But, as you can tell, I'm like this nerdy white guy, middle class Jewish kid from Los Angeles. So meeting 50 Cent for the first time was an experience. But I love kind of crossing boundaries. People don't usually do that in America. Usually a writer who does this, you're a rapper who does that. And I like to just be extremely fluid and mix with all different kinds of people and just see them. I see him as this brilliant strategist, kind of, I call him the Napoleon Bonaparte of hip hop. And just seeing on a higher level his intelligence, his spirit, as opposed to all the kind of identity things that keep us separated, really pisses me off, to be honest with you. Pardon my language.
I've heard you talk about the role that he plays and the role that we all play.
Yeah.
Did you feel like you had to play a role when you walked into that arena?
Okay, so I'll give you a little story here. So I first meet him in New York, and I'm a little bit intimidated, right?
How did you choose what to wear?
I can't remember back that far. It's 2005, 2006. I don't remember what I chose to wear. I wasn't like blinged out or anything because I never do that. That looks so fake. It's ridiculous. I'm not like Ali G or something, right? I know my limits. Anyway, so, but I'm just one white guy and he's like 9 of his entourage there, right? And so I'm feeling a little bit intimidated. And he, he's like just a very impressive looking person. He's got all this incredible jewelry. I was like transfixed by his bracelet, all diamonds on it. Must have been like worth $1 million. I don't know what. Anyway, the irony of the story, to get to your question, was I was intimidated, but he was also, told me later, he was intimidated by me. He thought he was going to be meeting someone who looked like Henry Kissinger, this kind of very impressive, maybe had a bit of a German accent, who knows, who was kind of, just so powerful. And then he meets this kind of nerdy guy. And I meet this man who's really soft and gentle and sweet. He's very sweet. So we were both kind of surprised by the persona that the public knows, but isn't really like who we are.
It's Mayim Bialik's breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you. She's got a neuroscience PhD or two. One fiction, one and now she's gonna break down